Thank you to all of our esteemed panelists for that thought-provoking discussion. I'm Randy Foose, board member and chair of the Endowment Strategic Planning Committee. As you've just seen and heard, New Hampshire has the opportunity to build on the national momentum for social progress on so many key issues. We've examined both the opportunities and the barriers on a local level. Now we're going to look at some possible solutions drawing from the experience of our neighbor to the north and of the Vermont Partnership for Fairness and Diversity. I'm pleased to introduce our keynote speaker, Curtis Reed, Jr., Executive Director of the Vermont Partnership. New Hampshire and Vermont are very different in many ways, but similar in others. For example, New Hampshire has an eastern seacoast, while Vermont is known as New England's west coast with beautiful Lake Champlain. Our states have both been traditionally homogeneous, though we know that's changing, and along with that comes unprecedented opportunity. Supporting and embracing this new demographic will be crucial to the success of New Hampshire in the future. But are we prepared, and why does our future success hinge on creating an equitable, welcoming, inclusive environment? Our keynote speaker will help us understand this imperative. Curtis Reed has spent his life working to create institutional and governmental structures that recognize, value, support, nurture, and provide justice for the individuals outside the majority. His journey began as a child in St. Louis, fighting Jim Crow racism, followed by 2 decades of social and economic justice work in international arenas. For the past 14 years, his work has focused on Vermont, strengthening relationships that have increased inclusion and equity in the Green Mountain State. Through a slow and steady trust-building process, the Vermont Partnership for Fairness and Diversity has led the way, producing substantive changes with Vermont state and municipal government, law enforcement, education, commerce, and human service delivery. The result, growing inclusive and equitable practices in Vermont's increasingly diverse cultural landscape. What can New Hampshire learn from the outcomes that Vermont is producing? Let's find out. Please join me in welcoming Mr. Curtis Reed, Jr.
Good afternoon. Oh, good. The mic is live. There are 3 things that I really dislike doing. One of which is going to the dentist. Obviously, that involves a little bit of pain. The next is paying more taxes than I have to. I don't mind paying taxes, but I hate paying more taxes than I absolutely, positively have to. And then the third is speaking before a group of people that I know very little about. So just by a show of hands, how many of you were born in New Hampshire? Okay, I'm trying to get the glare out. Okay. How many of you have been working on social justice issues for the last decade? 2 decades? 3 decades? Okay, 4 decades. Good. And finally, how many of you are wearing an awesome pair of socks? Okay. If you're wearing an awesome pair of socks, when I'm done, let's come up and we'll take a photo and we'll post it on Facebook, all right? Great. Thanks. I'm feeling a little bit better now. I am from Vermont. We're right across the Connecticut River. We are west of you as opposed to north of you. Well, both west and north. We're home to about 200, we're home to, let me get my glasses here. There we go. We're home to 626,000 hardy souls spread out over 9,217 square miles. We are otherwise known as the 0.0019% of the general population of these United States of America, the most rural state and among the most rapidly aging populations in the nation, as evidenced by my beard. Not so evident, however, is the fact that black people have been living in Vermont since the 1600s. Black people helped bring Vermont into statehood. If you remember, the Ethan Allen boys was effectively a multiracial group with individuals of African heritage. In 1777, our state constitution was the first to prohibit slavery in the United States. In 1823, Alexander Twilight was the first African American to graduate from U.S. College University. We have not only did he graduate from Middlebury, but he also turned out to be the first duly elected state legislator of color in the United States. We have Lucy Prince, who's the first published African-American poet in the United States. And yet, in spite of our history, our small landmass and minuscule, if not diminishing population, Vermont holds a particular and peculiar place in the American psyche. Vermont lawmakers passed non-binding resolutions to end the war in Iraq and to impeach President George Bush. We are leaders in clothing optional ordinances. And farmers markets, civil unions, marriage equality, GMO labeling, and home to an anti-nuclear power movement, second to none. And in my hometown of Brattleboro, where I've lived since 1979, voters instructed local police to arrest Bush and Cheney should they turn up, and to turn them over for crimes against humanity. Our bucolic landscape, our enduring values, and quirky progressive politics makes us a uniquely branded place. We're known the world over as the uncontested home of the best fall foliage, maple syrup, covered bridges, milk products, microbrews, skiing, and Bernie. Now, on a more serious note, injustice endures because the collective we choose to be predictable in our silent non-response to the microaggressions, micro-invalidations, and micro-injustices suffered by those in our immediate presence. Albert Einstein once said, "The world will not be destroyed by those who do evil, but by those who watch and do nothing." And let's be clear that not all evil is over the top, as in genocide or mass incarcerations or political corruption. But it can be as simple and subtle as marginalizing the other in your midst, but not acknowledging who they are. I challenge you to be the unexpected voice of social justice in all your spheres of influence, be that the sphere of professional contacts, the sphere of your faith community, the sphere of casual friendships or intimate relationships, or that all-important sphere of family, both nuclear and extended. I want you to display conspicuously courageous leadership in applied social justice, not social justice in the abstract of academia or in some grand design, but applied social justice that is up close and personal in your lives. The power of willful ignorance by those closest to you cannot be overestimated, as they knowingly and subversively attempt to derail your work towards strengthening diverse, inclusive, and equitable communities. However, it is your community, however you recognize that community, be it at work, family, school, faith, or whatever. And so now, I missed a question opening up, and that was, how many of you consider yourselves white allies to the movement of social justice, okay? All right, now, I'm gonna ask you not to be an ally. Because an ally works out of convenience, when it's convenient for them. That there is, what we look for co-conspirators, okay? Structural racism is the beast to be dealt with. And allies are individuals who, when it's convenient for them, when there's nothing at risk in terms of their own social standing or financial standing or inconvenience of time and place, if they're otherwise looking at this from a perspective of it's an option, I'm an ally, but an ally really means I can opt out when I feel like it. What we're looking for are co-conspirators. A couple of months ago on the bus in Burlington, there was a young woman who, young woman of color, who was, had a barrage of sort of racial epithets thrown in her direction, kind of whispered, but loud enough where she could hear what they were saying, as well as the other passengers. It got to the point where she just couldn't take it anymore, and so she got up and she, in her best diplomatic language, told these young guys to cut it out. They cut it out, and when she sat down, all the white folks on the bus, they applauded. They're like wearing Bernie T-shirts, and and they said, "Thank you for interrupting me." And she said, "No, I shouldn't have to do that. That's the work of an ally, someone who will sit there and wait until it's convenient to intervene." And it was convenient for them to intervene after she had taken care of the issue. So I'm going to ask you to stop being allies and become co-conspirators on behalf of social justice. I'm often asked, largely by liberal, progressive, white allies, what is a black man doing in Vermont? What are you doing in Vermont? It's the whitest state in the nation. And I also get the same question from folks that are sort of right-leaning. I can tell the difference between who the inquisitor is, because those on the right, the subtext of their question is, well, you're not from here, so when are you going back to where you came from? For those on the left, the subtext is, can you be my new black friend? All right? So what we're looking at is the objectification of people of color. And so when I'm asked the question, I, in my most therapeutic voice, say, well, my job is to help institutions, help government bodies strengthen inclusive and equitable business practices. And that we want to do that because I love Vermont. I wasn't born in Vermont. Many of you here were not born in New Hampshire, but I was not born in Vermont. And the narrative used to be that in order to be a Vermonter, you had to be born in Vermont. Well, Bob Allen, who is the president of the Wyndham Foundation, introduced me to a new definition of Vermont, of what a Vermonter is. And a Vermonter is someone who's made the intentional decision to live in Vermont and to make it a better place. And so, I carry that that idea of I love Vermont. I want it to be the best place to be for my kids and hopefully one day my grandchildren and their grandchildren. There are a couple of things that I want to tie into what the panel sort of spoke to. And that, if you scratch below the surface, Vermont is a very diverse place. It might not be racially diverse. We are racially diverse, but when that's growing. But that there's a great deal of diversity. So we need to accept the fact that we are already diverse, okay? Whether it's around sexual orientation, gender identity, whether it's around socioeconomic class, ability, disability. We are a diverse state. When I hear people say, oh, we're just all white people in Vermont, I say, well, no. You're not all white people because I'm from Vermont and obviously that's not the case. But we need to understand first and foremost that we live in a diverse community. We need to acknowledge that sometimes our communities operate in ways that are sometimes exclusive and sometimes unjust. There's no sugarcoating. There's no, you need to move out of that sense of privilege to understand that there's sometimes, life for the other, whomever the other might be, that they're feeling excluded and they're suffering through injustices. Those of us in northern New England, we need to make sure that our communities are fully inclusive of the other today. That we need to hone the skills around inclusiveness now. Don't wait until people of color in the state are 15, 20, 30%. But the opportunity that both Vermont and New Hampshire have is the fact that if we recognize that we have diversity, we recognize that we need to be much more inclusive and equitable, and we start working where we are with the populations that we have, then as our populations grow, more diversely racially, then we have the skill sets to be able to bring that new population into our communities. We at Vermont Partnership, we just finished our first decade of a 4-decade initiative that we call Vermont Vision for a Multicultural Future. We have 3 other major initiatives, but I'm going to spend most of my time talking about that particular one. Our other initiatives are the Vermont African American Heritage Trail. There's some brochures on your tables, I believe. We have a robust initiative around civic engagement in terms of encouraging marginalized populations, largely ethnic racial minorities, to be involved in the political process beyond the ballot box. And then we have a whole series of cultural enrichment programs for K through 12. But I want to repeat that we just finished the first decade of 4 decades worth of planned work. That we have managed to suppress our socialization for instant gratification because sustainable change takes place incrementally and it takes place over time. But you also need to be prepared for the unexpected. Tectonic shift in the social landscape, whether it be Occupy or Black Lives Matter, of being prepared to take advantage of the openings that those larger movements provide. As you look at your vision for the state of New Hampshire, I need you to be aware of two really insidious traps. And these traps lie between you and your vision for the state. The first trap is analysis paralysis. Those of you who are in academia love to analyze things, and we bring that into our communities. Let's do study groups. Let's do a reading group. Let's study this to death. And we study it as a way of sort of deferring action. That, oh, well, I really can't do anything about racial justice because I haven't studied it enough. I don't know more. I don't know all there is to know about it. So let's invite some black folks in, some brown folks in. Let's talk about their experiences. Let's analyze those experiences. And very little gets done other than folks of color reliving the indignities that we've suffered throughout our lives. It's non-productive. It's not the work of a co-conspirator. Allies will want to engage us in that conversation. Because one, it separates them from the problem, and it doesn't force them to take any action beyond simply, here's a bibliography to read, here are some videos to watch, but it's not pushing you into doing meaningful and substantive action. The second trap that you need to be aware of is the presumption of I. We all live with some reality around the golden rule, which is, treat other people the way that you'd like to be treated. When I was in college, I was addicted to ham sandwiches. Okay, they'd see me coming to the cafeteria, and they'd start building my 2 ham sandwiches, extra ham and a tomato. One day, I sort of noticed, not one day, but there was a fairly nice-looking young lady who was also at the cafe at the same time I was, and back in the day when I looked a little better and was a little thinner, figured that I would go up to her. I couldn't figure out, what's going to be my hook? And I thought, hey, ham sandwiches. I'll give her one of my ham sandwiches, because I love ham sandwiches. And of course, everyone else loves ham sandwiches as well. And so I muster up the courage one day, and I go over to the table, and I said, hello, my name is Curtis. Would you like to have a ham sandwich? And before I could get the sandwich out of my mouth, the finger went up. I don't eat pork. So I kind of backpedaled kind of out of that. But what I recognized was that I had not been observant enough of the young woman outside of her obvious beauty, that I believe that because I love something so much, that of course the rest of the world does as well. And this applies also on an institutional level. And at Vermont Partnership, we began our work looking at the social and moral arguments around social justice. That obviously, because we believed that this was the morally right thing to do, to fight for social justice, that everyone else would also fall into that line. Our early history as an organization, though, we spent the first decade, we're 20 years old, we've spent our first decade helping people defend their civil rights. We worked on about 200 cases a year, and about 5 or 6% of those cases dealt with issues of race. The rest dealt with disability rights, gender rights, the whole other litany of rights, because white folks have rights too, you know. But so we spent a decade, and you know, helping people defend their civil rights, and unfortunately, the organizations that were the object of the work of the folks that we worked with displaced their anger from the individual to us, because we were providing them the tools to do and to fight the good fight. So as our organization evolved, we realized that we could spend the next 100 years working at that individual level and not change a thing. And so we decided we jettisoned all of our direct service programs. We had HIV/AIDS programming. Jasmine is back there. I've known her for a long time. We had programs for single mothers, for men of color. We ran a summer camp program. We just had a lot of direct services that we were providing the Brattleboro community. But when we decided to go upstream, the legacy of our work around helping people defend civil rights was uppermost in the minds of the institutions that we had hoped to change. And so we went on this really deep listening tour. And as we engaged people, and we went through a rebranding process. Our original name was the Alana Community Organization. Almost a decade ago now, we transitioned into being Vermont Partnership for Fairness and Diversity. And we brought on the Communicators Group, which is a sort of a PR firm. And we asked them to help us with this rebranding. And they did this great listening tour, and then we went with them on this listening tour throughout the state. And it became apparent to us that the voice of James Carville was rattling in our brains. Carville was the campaign manager for Bill Clinton in '92. And he's credited with the phrase, "It's the economy," which was later added on, "It's the economy, stupid." Okay? So what we figured out was that people were concerned about their bottom lines. They were concerned about the economy. They were concerned about their budgets. And so we went back and we figured out, how do we engage our former adversaries in a conversation about inclusion and equity? And our solution to that was, Vermont Partnership will help the state of Vermont expand its economic pie. We take a look at the demographics. You know, we're rapidly becoming a nation that's browner and blacker. Vermont, traditionally for the last, or up until 2013, focuses marketing efforts on white heterosexual males with incomes of $120,000 or more. We said to then candidate Shumlin that, and this is where we sort of take advantage of an opportunity. Brian Doobie's campaign, who was the Republican running for governor, was pure Vermont. Pure Vermont. He wouldn't even consider the fact that it might have been a dog whistle, right? I'm talking about agricultural products, okay? Well, said it to the Abenaki that were, the object of genocide. Say that to the Jews in the state who suffered under the Holocaust. Say that to the Southeast Asians who were in the state looking at the Khmer Rouge. No, that was on many different levels. It was a really poor move. I wrote an editorial that caught the attention of Peter Shumlin, who was a Democratic candidate, and he said, "Curtis, how do I not get in your crosshairs?" And I said, "Well, Peter, there's something that you can do. There are 3 or 4 things that you can add to your platform that would signal to the rest of the world that you were going to be an inclusive and equitable governor. One, acknowledge the fact that that there's a market, there's a multicultural market outside of our borders that we're not accessing, and that the creation of a Vermont African American Heritage Trail could in fact be part of a key component in helping to turn the economy around. Because if you ask a person of color outside of Vermont, right, I travel around and say, "Oh yeah, I'm from Vermont," and the first thing out of their mouth is, "Hey, isn't that the whitest state in the nation?" I'd say, "Well, yes, it is." And then the next question is that intentional? Is there something beneath the progressive liberal veneer in the state of Vermont that says, black folks, brown folks, don't come here. This is the last stand for white supremacy. So the first thing I said to the governor, I said, look, or the then candidate for governor, was your platform needs to include an economic plan that is going to attract ethnic racial minorities to the state. And your ticket for that would be to support the Vermont African American Heritage Trail. He said, "Curtis, that's a really good idea, but where do you get the information?" I said, just by chance, we've already done research on about 95 sites around the state. So the only thing that you need to do once you become governor is to pull in your Secretary for Commerce and Community Development and say, make this happen. Second thing was that his cabinet needs to look like the state, and that his platform, one of the planks in his platform was that his transition team was going to have a diverse set of candidates from which to pull. So the day after he was elected, called up and he said, "Okay, Curtis, I'm in. Who do you have?" Sent him off about 35 or so CVs, from which he chose an Asian, Latino, African American to be part of his cabinet. A lot of people said no. Why would I give up my cushy job for a life in politics that is so uncertain? But at least his transition team made the ask, so that everyone had an opportunity to say no. The third plank that we asked him for, that he delivered on, was the redesign of information on gubernatorial boards and commissions. That at that point in time, information was in a file cabinet, and you didn't know even who sat on which commission, when their terms were up, how to apply. And so we encouraged him to totally overhaul that process. And I said to him, "Peter, you build it, I will make sure they come, because I've got a cattle prod that will get folks to the website." And so he built it, and to his credit, he's made about 40 appointments of people of color on a full range of gubernatorial boards and commissions. not just those that one might associate with the challenges that we're facing, but simply across the board. So that would not have happened had Brian Doobie chose another campaign slogan. So there's so anyway, back to the I think I got sidetracked there. So on an institutional basis, what we did was we said, where are people right now? Where are our adversaries? And what do we need to do? How do we need to be different to gain their trust and to gain their trust to the point, to the level that they said, hey, we can do this. We can make Vermont the most welcoming state in the nation. We can change the narrative of Vermont. And so what we did with this initiative, what we're currently doing with this initiative, Vermont Vision for a Multicultural Future, we spent our first decade, we're actually in year 12, we spent the first decade focused on law enforcement with state police. And state police, they said, well, why us? We said, well, when you think about it, if there are going to be more folks of color coming into the state of Vermont, the only public official that they are likely to be in touch with, and this is for any visitor of any color, will be someone in law enforcement. Whether you're misoperating your vehicle, whether you have a broken taillight, whether you're in an accident or you're the victim of a crime, and so we need to make sure that the relationship between law enforcement and our visitors are such that it exceeds their expectations for service. Keep in mind, we have 40 years to work on this. But in this first decade, state police in Vermont have dedicated an enormous amount of resources to trying to get it right. Whether it's having someone sit down with them, looking at dash cam videos, helping them rewrite the narrative. If a state trooper stops you now, the question is no longer, do you know why I pulled you over? But it's, I'm Trooper so-and-so, I pulled you over because you were going 15 miles over the speed limit. We're really concerned with public safety here. Is there a reason that you were going so fast? We're not robbing the dignity of the motorist by saying, do you know why I pulled you over? But you give the motorist an opportunity to say, hey, my wife, her water just broke. We're just trying to get to the hospital. Or no, my parent just died and I'm just not really thinking. But that the idea is, let's give people their dignity. Let's let them retain their dignity. Why bother, perturb, piss off 98% of the population with a narrative that puts them in a position of having to defend an indefensible question that you're asking them, which is, why did I pull you over? So we started with state police. The state police has been a great ambassador in trying to get the sheriff's departments and local police departments on the same page. We currently work with police departments in the Burlington area, Rutland, and Brattleboro that are rapidly adopting this fair and impartial policing practices. But the bottom line is, they understand that their salaries are dependent upon how much money state government can raise. And that's not raising money for tickets, because only, state police only tickets 40% of the folks that they stop. But it's allowing the visitor to feel as though that they're valued and that public safety is the norm, which allows them to spend more money. So, it's one approach to looking at the kind of the big picture. And we've had a great deal of success with getting not only folks in law enforcement, but folks in the education sector, the business sector, to pay attention to that. And in the business sector, we're helping rebrand Burlington as the most international and culturally diverse destination in northern New England. State of Vermont Department of Tourism, which has been promoting the African American Heritage Trail full gangbusters. You see the brochure that's sitting on your table, but they also advertise on the Latin stations of Pandora. If you look at Vermont Life magazine, kind of a redefinition of who a Vermonter is, that is much more inclusive. In the back page of Vermont Life magazine, once a year, they highlight a person of color. 2 years ago, it was Luis Guzman, who's an actor. Last year it was Reuben Jackson, who's a host on VPR for jazz. So there's sort of multiple benefits. But the way that we do that, the way that we are able to engage our former adversaries is that we listened first. And it doesn't mean that we have to give up the fact that the social and moral arguments are still firmly planted in our beliefs. But we now have a set of people, policymakers, our Vermont Vision Conference. We pull together a small group of 60 to 80 people every year, and it's designed for executive, legislative leadership, nonprofit leadership across the state, and community members. And the idea is, we believe that Vermont, in the next 28 years, will be recognized as the epicenter of inclusive thought and practice in the United States. Not a center, but if New Hampshire wants to join us, we can say, and if we can get Maine, we can say that northern New England is the epicenter of inclusive thought and practice in the United States. And what's so powerful about that is that although our demographics are such that one might not think that work around inclusion and equity should be evident, but we should not lose sight of the fact that we are a diverse place already. And there are people already in the room who feel marginalized, whether they're women, or whether they're a person with disabilities, or non-native speakers of English, that let's work on getting the inclusion piece down. And it may not be an economic argument for New Hampshire, but we found in Vermont that economic argument is really very, very powerful. One of the sites on the African American Heritage Trail is in Colchester, and it's not in the brochure there because it's a new one that just came online. And it's 40th and Allen, where the Buffalo Soldiers were stationed from 1901 to 1906. There are like 300 African American motorcycle clubs in the United States. 100 of them carry the label Buffalo Soldier and Trooper. Seems kind of pretty easy to connect the dots of, we have a site dedicated to African American Buffalo Soldiers, and we have a population of folks that aspire to the values of the Buffalo Soldiers. Well, let's invite them to Vermont, okay? Let's invite them, bring them here. These are all folks, for the most part, who have disposable incomes such that they can buy a $50,000 Harley and then tootle around the country. Our challenge with the business community is really around implicit bias. Oh, black people don't ski, black people don't motorcycle, black people don't run marathons, brown people don't do X, Y, or Z. Our work with the Department of Tourism is slowly showing them, well, the Department of Tourism gets it, but the broader business community is slow to sort of catch up, that if you don't think black folks ski, then you're going to lose out on the 50,000 members of the National Brotherhood of Skiers. And the other sort of acronym, NBS, which they like to say, means Negroes Bring Snow. And this year we could have used a whole lot of NBS members to show up because we didn't have the snow. But the idea of getting the business community to see a new market that they can't see because they've not thought about it before. They never thought the fact that there are other parts of the country are really courting the multicultural marketplace. So the National Association of Hispanic Journalists, rather than have them go to Providence, Rhode Island, or Boston, or DC, have them come to Vermont. But if they don't know that Vermont exists, then we have the challenge. Or they know that we exist, but it's in the context of the whitest state in the nation, and is there something nefarious happening beneath the covers in Vermont? So what we're working to change those, and we can have the conversation with people because we've demonstrated over the last decade or so that we have Vermont's interest at heart. That for us, we're bullish on Vermont. And the work that we do to expand Vermont's economic pie has implications around racial justice and social justice. And so that opens up the door for that broader conversation that goes not so broad, but also very, very deep as people begin to challenge themselves and challenge their own sort of upbringing and what has brought them to where they are. We take people where they are. That there's a considerable effort on people's part because they feel like they can trust us. We would not be where we are. We could not start where we are today had it been 10 years ago when we were considered the enemy. But more and more, we're considered a partner in building a Vermont that will ultimately become the epicenter of inclusive thought and practice. Now, I'm going to close with one thing. How many of you have heard me speak before in Nashua? I think that was where I was last time. Okay? So do you remember what the assignment was? No. All right. Okay. Yeah, I spent a lot of time overseas, and I spent time moving from oases to oases in the Sahara Desert. And I clipped into this one oasis, and there were a group of young people that limited the fact that they had nothing to do. And what they really wanted, like a stereo system or a projector system that ran off of solar panels. And I said, well, look, I will match you CFA for CFA, which was the currency back then, and I'll come back in a year. We wrote up a contract with the village elders, and that contract said that the young people in that village will stop smoking, and they will save the dollars or the CFA from smoking into a separate fund. And then when I came back a year later, I would match that CFA for CFA. Well, I come back 13 months later, roll into the village, and they said, "What are you doing here?" And I pulled out the contract. If you come to my office, the contract is on my wall. I said, "Well, I'm here to honor my end of the contract. You know, you were raising money from stopping smoking, and I'm here to, you know, to pay up." And they said, young people said, "Oh, no. Well, we didn't think you were going to come back. We didn't do anything." All right? So.
We didn't think you were going to come back.
Right, exactly. You didn't think I was going to come back, but I always come back, okay? I always come back. But the assignment was to really take a look at the landscape of nonprofits and organizations working in social justice and to settle on one who would be the clearinghouse for information. It doesn't mean that you have to agree with what others are doing, but someone needs to have a handle on who's doing what, where, and to provide a space where you can have that exchange of strategies and tactics. And so I left New Hampshire, Nashua, having left the assignment. Okay, so what organization is going to step up to do that? So you went from an A+ when I left you to you're at a D right now, but you can recoup. Okay. What makes it work in Vermont for us is that we have a sense of what's going on in all 14 counties. You know, the table of social justice. You have a number of people sitting around, and we all don't agree with each other. It's like, anyone here do any dog sledding? Okay. Well, there's sort of two ways to hitch your dogs to your sled. You have this bullet formation where they're side by side, and they're really constrained about what they can do. Or you have this sort of fan approach where each dog is tethered separately. And that way, you know, the dogs can figure out where the thin ice is. If one dog falls in, the others are there to kind of pull them out. And so what we are like that resource of knowing who's doing what where, and then providing opportunity for that exchange. It also provides an opportunity that when there's an issue when there's an opportunity that we can put out a call to action. So whether it's an NAACP or whether it's another organization, it'd be great. But I want to leave you with the assignment that is sitting on your table, okay? And thank you very much.